So the W2-131, it's from a Chinese company called Luxury Precision, which makes some really crazy, actually some crazy expensive portable players, but this is probably the least crazy of their things. And again, it's something that, well, for example, I've got one of the cables that comes with, a USB-C to USB-C. I can just plug it in thus, and I have my iPad mini, and if you have maybe a phone or something like that as well, you can plug it in and you get better audio quality. And like I said, like the standard Apple thing for this kind of, well, performance is, well, this has a headphone jack in there, but if you have just like a phone like my iPhone 12 Pro Max, which I'm using to record this, then you might just use this kind of dongle and plug in some in-ear monitors. And that's, of course, assuming that you're not actually using Bluetooth headphones. That's kind of the cool thing these days, is to use Bluetooth. Now, but what happens if you want better sound quality? Well, what tends to happen is, someone comes along and they go, hey, check out my nice, in-ear monitors or my nice headphones. And then you kind of plug them in and have a listen and suddenly go, oh, so that's how the music really sounds. And then you go down the rabbit hole, as we call it, of more and more expensive devices. And this W2-131, as we have here, is about $309 at the moment. So as things go, it's quite expensive for such a little device. But let's talk about why, or what's in here that makes it kind of so expensive. We've got to consider that in something like this little dongle that Apple provides, this inside here has got to fit all the electronics necessary to translate a digital audio signal into an analog one, and then it has got to have an amplifier relying on the phone's power to drive your headphones or in-ear monitors, whatever you want to plug in there. Now this has, instead of just one tiny or a couple of tiny chips squeezed in there, this has a whole bunch of electronics that improves the quality of the sound coming out. Now actually it does use a chip that is found in something like a phone, and that's a chip from a company called Cirrus Logic. Now if you've ever owned an Apple device, for example, you'll be familiar because Cirrus Logic chips were used or are used in Apple products where there is an analog output. Now with that, if this has just got the same chip as you can find in your Apple device, why would you care about having something like this, and why not just bother with maybe your notebook computer or something like that? Why not just stick with that? Well, the reason is these chips have got to do everything from, again, just like this one, it's got to do both the digital conversion and drive whatever headphones or in-ear monitors you might want to plug in. But it's limited to whatever power it can get from the phone, and maybe all the power supply is, the priority when a company is making phones is not the audio output. It tends to more be everything else, like battery life and that kind of thing. And the power output of these is absolutely minimal, just enough to kind of get you going. Now, if you do have some kind of expensive in-ear monitors, and just as a pair here, this is really overkill compared to what we were talking about, but just as an example, this is a pair of in-ear monitors from a company called Final in Japan. You can see they look like they're made of watch metal, high-end watch metal, probably are. And these cost $2,000. Now, I'm not suggesting people are going to necessarily go out and buy $2,000 in-ear monitors. I've reviewed on my channel various in-ear monitors from, about $150 upwards for the most part, or maybe a bit cheaper upwards. But so you can get a variety of really nice performing in-ear monitors from over $100 up to, or even $50 up to thousands of dollars if you want to go kind of fully go the full crazy, you could say. So this is just one of a random examples that I have on my desk. So but the thing is, why wouldn't you just get these and then plug them into the dongle or the the headphone out on your phone? And the reason is that these have, well, not this pair specifically, but they may have bigger drivers in there. They may have multiple drivers, like higher end speakers will have multiple drivers, not just, one for the highs and mids and one for the lows kind of thing, but might have multiple drivers for the lows, multiple drivers for the mids, multiple drivers for the highs. And even in a little pair of in-ear monitors such as these, these have just really big drivers in them so that you get better sound quality. Now, remember we talked about this has to be able to do everything, or maybe the sound output in your phone or your laptop has to do everything. Well, it's going to struggle to do everything really well. It's kind of like, suddenly you've got to go from driving a car down to the shops to pulling a trailer. You're going to get a car with a bigger and more powerful engine. Same kind of thing here. We may have the same chip in here, but it's got a lot better power supply components. It's got a lot more electronics in there to improve the sound quality compared to the little dongle, or even if it's the same chip that's inside your laptop or phone. So Luxury and Precision have made one of the probably the nicer ones that are out there. We looked at one earlier called the Cayenne RU6, which is very far down the rabbit hole in terms of what we might call full-on crazy, using some often used in high-end digital to analog converters is actually not a chip-based converter, but an R2R ladder-based converter. But that was its own video. We're going to talk about the Luxury and Precision today. So let's plug this thing in and have a look at what the difference is, what it can do, because it's actually got 3 buttons there on the top, one, and this is a double button, and you can do more with this than you can with the kind of standard output of your computer, and without even touching the software in there. Now, we're plugged into my iPad mini, and I've had to turn some of the lights off because the display on this is really quite dim. So even once I turn it on, you can kind of maybe not see it too clearly. So if you can't, my apologies. So in here we have, well, he's got a lot of going on the screen here. We have, if you can just very see in the corner there, it says VOL for volume, and it's at 64. We have an L for low gain, PCM, which is your standard digital audio format, and then it shows you the bit rate and sample rate, which is 16-bit 44.1, which is what we call CD quality back when we used CDs and didn't stream stuff. And we've got normal, which is we'll show in a bit. Now, if I do to stop the display kind of wearing itself out, it switches off automatically. But first, starting with the buttons on top, this is your volume control. You can see that going up and down there. It switches to display of the volume, and you can scroll through there. And you'll see some options about that if you want to control the volume from, say, the device it's plugged into. If you long press this button here, you have a choice of different EQ settings. And these are called, well, you can play with these. You might want a bass boost, for example. These are kind of the common things you see on portable players of various kinds. I mean, there's stuff you play around with. I don't tend to use them myself, but normal is what we call perfectly flat. The next thing is a thing called SDF, and I can't really find any good instructions about this anywhere. Now, the SDF is, I suppose, designed with special settings that are designed to be used with different high-end in-ear monitors, like the Sony IER Z1R, which I've reviewed, the Shure SE846, which was very popular at one time, the Sennheiser i800S, and the Beyerdynamic Zelento. And these, I don't know what exactly they do. There isn't, because Luxury and Precision tend to be more focused in, more well-known in China. Their kind of support outside is, tends to be a little bit vague, a little bit inconsistent. And so I actually go through a guy who talks directly to the CEO and asks questions for me. But there were special settings in there for these different in-ear monitors if you have these particular models. Unfortunately, none for my final in-ear monitors. And so I don't know if they really do anything really super useful, because I don't tend to use EQ either very much. But the next thing that's in there, of course, we have 2 gain settings, and that's useful if you're going to plug in, say, in-ear monitors. Tends to be good for low gain, and maybe high gain for if you're using full-sized headphones, because you want it basically louder. So aside from that, then we have what's called a digital filter. Now, I always say in my videos, if you know what digital filters are, play around with them and see if you notice a difference. If you don't stress over it too much. Now, some of the things you can do lately with digital filters is set no digital filter, which is called NOS, or non-oversampling. Then you have various things: low latency slow, low latency fast, slow, fast, and I just tend to leave it on fast. Now, these things I could talk for hours and hours, and I still wouldn't even scratch the surface of digital filters. They're basically the things that remove high frequency noise that's outside the the bandwidth of the music, and they're kind of necessary. Otherwise, you get a lot of distortion, basically. Well, not distortion that you can hear, but the quality of the sound ends up becoming kind of more smeared, more mushy, and all that. But some people actually, like if you have some really aggressive sounding, say, rock music, you might want to, one of my friends did, they set their devices into non-oversampling mode, and as a result, that means it kind of takes the edge off the kind of the sharpness of the music, if you so desire that. But I tend to leave it on fast because it tends to be the best technical quality. But again, it's one of those things some people play around with and hear a significant difference, and some people don't, and yeah, it's one of those rabbit holes. But if they know what the things do, you can probably play around yourself. The other thing people might do is, if you're plugging into a computer, people might put it into non-oversampling mode if they want to use digital filter or upsampling, high-quality upsampling from software on their computer. The next thing on the list is SPDIF, and one of the cool things this does is the 3.5mm output here can be used as a digital output. And in using so let's say you want to connect some device that doesn't have USB or isn't convenient to connect to, say, a device like my iPad I have here. Then you can actually use this as a SPDIF output. So I actually did that and connected it to a Chord Mojo so that I could actually listen to this and then listen to the Mojo quickly without having to switch things around. So I actually used that setup to compare the sound quality, because then I could listen to this and then listen to the Mojo without having to switch around more than one cable. So back to the settings again. Now, of course, you have the display can be automatically off or manually switched off. We actually might switch to manual because it keeps going off as I'm talking about this device. And a couple of other things. HID key. Now, if you want to control the volume from your computer, or your device, such as I'm going to do now, so I have my iPad here. You can just get it on screen. And if I want to control, I'm going to scroll the volume up and down. If you watch the volume control on the LNP, as I do that, the volume, you can see it's just scrolling up in the top left-hand corner as I scroll on my iPad mini. And that means you can conveniently control, if you want to control the internal volume of the W2 from an external device, you can turn that on. Now, it tends to glitch a bit. Now, the problem I had was that you shouldn't do it while playing music. You should switch that on, unplug your earphones and then switch it, because what happened, as you saw when I did switch it, is that the volume suddenly went to 100. So let's say I've jacked the volume down, it's down 66, and we go through the settings to the HID and I turn it off. Well, now I've just put my iPad mini volume at max down there, and then watch the volume. Now it's at 66 or something like that. I'm going to go through here and set it to on, and watch the volume is going to go boom, 100. Now if you're playing music and you do that, it actually disconnects the device from whatever you connected to and reconnects it. You are going to have an earful, and it's going to be very unpleasant. So be careful if you do that, but it's convenient if you want to be able to control the volume from whatever device you're connecting it to. So HID key set. Now UAC is useful if you have a device that doesn't like USB 2. You can actually set it to USB 1 compatible, and some things will actually behave a little bit better if you do that. If for some reason you do have some device that doesn't like UAC 2. The other last thing is one of those vague things that the CEO refused to tell me what it does. It actually called tuning. Two tuning versions, 1 and 2, and they make the sound very slightly different. And I think tuning 1 was a touch sharper sounding and tuning 2 is touch softer, or was it the other way around? I mean, it was such a tiny difference, I can't be sure, but there are two different very subtle tunings there. And if you have like really good in-ear monitors, you can probably notice a bit of a difference. Everything else, well, I kind of just tended to forget about it. And so you get actually, for your $300, you actually get a lot of functionality in there. I mean, it isn't just something you plug in and go. Well, you can, but it actually can do a lot and give you a lot of information. You know, are you getting, if you've got a song on your device that says it's lossless and high res, you can check the resolution now and say Apple Music, which I've got open here, and you can check that you're actually getting the correct bit perfect output from this, so that you are getting the same resolution. It isn't resampling the computer or device or whatever, and resampling kind of on a computer is not good quality. So I suppose the idea in this is that it will use better quality oversampling, and rather than what your computer will give you. So next thing up here is, well, why does this thing have a normal headphone port and a whopping great bigger one, which actually has a special name, the 4.4mm Pentagon? And that's where we get into the rabbit hole. Now, one of the cool things this comes with is, well, a green case, and if you want that kind of, well, aqua look, well, that's what you get for this one. And this is called the 131 version. You may know that there are actually two versions of the W2. Now, the original used a standard Cirrus Logic chip that was probably common in phones, which did both the digital to analog conversion and the amplification. Now, the availability of those became limited, so they had to use the one without the amplification and put in their own amplification inside here, and that's the 131 version, because the chip name ends with 131. So there's a very subtle difference between the sound of those, and you can pursue places like Head5 if you want to see those details, but essentially we're dealing with much the same thing. And anyway, it fits in this nice little funky case, which has a really cool thing, which is a stick-on magnet, appropriately named. So it's got a little sticky stuff on there, and you stick it on the back of, well, supposedly your phone, and once it's on the back of your phone, it'll just clamp on there nicely, and it's got enough hold to hold it in place. And a problem we found with the Cayenne RU6 is that the magnets, I don't know where I've stuck them back in their box, but this had magnets that stick on here too. And when you put the magnets on there, this would fall off easily. They've actually put a big, fairly solid plate on here. But there are various sticky options you can get if you want something that will, well, maybe hold better than a magnet. But it does the job. It's fairly firm. You can see how hard I'm tapping that to kind of get it to move. I'm actually putting a fair bit of pressure. I'll bring it up here. You can see I'm putting a fair bit of pressure, and it's not moving. I actually have to push fairly hard. So that actually is a nice, well, metal. Well, it's obviously the magnets are in here, but it's a solid metal plate, and which I'm now getting my fingers all over, and I had to polish so I could do this video. So yeah. Anyway, we're back to the funky stuff like why does this have a whopping great port on here, and what is this? Well, this is the other end of it. It's called a 4.4mm Pentacon, and this is one of those rabbit holes that audiophiles get into to essentially get into the story. A standard headphone socket, if I just pull a random cable from my collection of stuff floating around my desk, uses a 3.5mm connector, and that's common, you know, super common. And so, but what happened was, some years ago, a lot of manufacturers got obsessed with this thing called balanced. Now, an amplification circuit, if you know anything at least basically about electricity goes in a circle, and in one part of the proverbial circle you have the amplification circuit, and there's your left and your right, and then the return would just go through what's called the ground or the earth. So the thing is, the idea of a balanced circuit was that you have amplification both on the positive side and the negative, but the negative needed, of course, separate connectors. So then they started getting into do that. You do have it in high-end audio where you have XLR connections, but in portable audio they started making various connections with, you have your left positive, left negative, right negative, and ground. Now, for various reasons, there are various connectors made, and none of them became a proper standard. This is actually made to a specified Japanese standard, and some of the connectors that people were using were kind of dodgy. They were designed for medical equipment connectors, or they were using ones for tiny earpieces which were not good quality, and the connection quality was bad, and there are issues galore. And this is designed to solve everything. It was primarily, you'll see these made by a company in Japan, goes under the brand name Pentacon, Penta being 5. And it also allows connections if you're using hi-fi connections, because normal balanced headphone jacks would only use 4 connectors, and then if you need to use make it into an interconnect, you need that ground connector for everything to work properly. So it's a bit large, it's somewhat larger than your standard 3.5, you can see there, if I hold them side by side, but it provides a better connection, it's more reliable, you can use it for full-sized headphones, you can use it desktop gear, you can use it for everything, and it's kind of becoming the standard for basically connecting headphones and earphones, because it kind of bridges that gap nicely. So the idea in this is that they've doubled the circuitry to provide more power output for the balanced. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean it's better, but it's become such a hyped thing in the portable audio world that devices that don't have the balanced connector are kind of looked down upon by enthusiasts, even though you can actually do just as technically a good a job with a 3.5mm amplifier. Just people, enthusiasts, if you've ever been in any kind of hobby where there are super enthusiasts and people go crazy over stuff that's unnecessary, you'll understand what I mean. Yeah, same thing in the audiophile world as everywhere else. But anyway, what difference does it make when you're actually listening to with some nice in-ear monitors or some headphones? Well, that's a good opportunity to talk about the sound. Because I'm an enthusiast, I even used a slightly better cable with a W2-131. Well, they tend to come with these fairly basic things, which are fairly common and dull and have L and P written on them. You can actually get some ones, and I'll post a link to them. These actually just use standard, but slightly bigger and kind of standard, like a desktop cable quality USB, but to spec. It's not just random cable braided together like some people do. It's actually, the spec is actually important. And it seems to have better, maybe even better, more shielded connectors. Anyway, it looks cooler, so we're going to do everything with a cool cable. And yeah, is it going to make a difference in sound? Yeah, vaguely, maybe tiny bit, or maybe not. I don't know. So anyhow, the W2-131. Well, actually, I used it with a few different, headphones and the like. Here, if you saw one of my recent videos, a pair of Meze Lyrics, a $2,000 closed-back headphones, and being that they're portable, they're actually very appropriate for this kind of listening, or this kind of device. Now, unfortunately, I only have the cable that is single-ended, or they only have the 3.5mm cable, which we can see here. And so actually it was a good test for how they perform with that. But I did use a different cable from a different pair of headphones to test the balanced output. And, well, you do get, because it's double the circuitry, you do get more power from the balanced output and a bit better performance. Actually, the interesting thing was you get about the same, it seemed to have about the same loudness switching between single-ended and balanced. Of course, switching to the balanced output, things got a bit louder. But keeping things volume matched, the advantage of having the extra circuitry in there is that you'll get maybe slightly better headphone drive from the W2-131. So it's probably going to be most optimized to work with the balanced output. However, you don't need much power for most in-ear monitors, and it did work very satisfactory from the 3.5mm output, even actually with these headphones. Now, obviously, it's not going to be as good as a really high-end portable player or something like a Chord Mojo, something that has a dedicated battery and a lot more power. But actually, I was surprised at how well it did in general. And while, maybe what we call the dynamics in the music, how much punch you get in the music, how much things like drum hits and that come through weren't as pronounced, if you're using the 3.5mm port as maybe using the 4.4, or, being not having as much kind of impact and dynamics of using, say, again, something like a Mojo, which has its own battery, or something with a lot more power. Yeah, that kind of thing wasn't there, but it was kind of very easy to listen with. Now, in terms of sound, I mean, you can say, well, okay, it's a dongle, it does the job, but actually some of the devices I have used, one of the things that it does really well is something that the Bluetooth portable devices like FIO's BTR5 and the various devices from IFI and that don't do so well is the USB connection. Now, if something's optimized for Bluetooth connection, plugging in, say, via USB to the computer, and you can see my computer just behind me. Now, the computer's connected to the ground so that through the ground plane noise can travel, and those things don't have very optimized USB implementation, and so they can start to sound harsh and edgy because that noise is coming through the circuits. Now, if you plug them, of course, into the iPad mini, like I did in my recent IFI video, then that harshness goes away and things work really well. Things like these dongles from Luxury Precision and others, they're designed to work really well whether you plug them into a computer or plug them into something like this iPad mini, so you don't get as much harshness. The other thing is something like the BTR5 through Bluetooth sounds maybe like the treble has this kind of edginess and harshness to it, which can be, well, I find it a little bit unpleasant. Something that Luxury Precision has is that it sounds very smooth, and that made it, even with the the most optimum filter in there, and not non-oversampling mode, but the most optimum filter selected, even out of my computer, it sounded very smooth and agreeable to listen to music with. Actually, probably maybe a touch too smooth and maybe too easy listening. Now, there was enough kind of detail in there. I mean, it's not like a high-end component. It's not, say, maybe as good as, say, Chord's Mojo, which is just going to, just has a better all-over technology in it. But as something that I could plug into, say, a phone and take with me, even with a nice pair of in-ear monitors, although, of course, we're going for a really big overkill to showing these final in-ear monitors, even that, it just made listening really easy and pleasant. And I actually found, even with the single-ended output, a really nice match with the Meze Lyrics. So especially the kind of like maybe if you a bit of a listen to music before sleeping, where you want to listen to something relaxing, and you're not going to care so much about, say, hearing the singer's lips parting perfectly or her nose hairs blowing or whatever it is. That kind of crazy fine detail that us audio enthusiasts like. But it just was very nice and smooth to listen with. Now, in comparison to other stuff like this Cayenne RU6, and I know a lot of people know about the Cayenne RU6, the Cayenne RU6 kind of sounded more, warning, audiophile term ahead, musical. And just as of course the RU6 has that unpleasant feature in that you may have to make sure that the volume in your device is at maximum. It has that annoying volume control that kind of cuts out every 10th adjustment because of the implementation of the volume setup. It doesn't have anywhere near as many features as this does. It's maybe slightly more detail coming from the Luxury and Precision, but kind of the musical enjoyment level of the RU6 was simply I suppose just better is just the easiest way to put it. It was a more enjoyable thing. The only problem, of course, as well, is that it really sucks battery out of devices, even this iPad, because it draws about twice the amount of current to supply those resistor ladders in there. It has better dynamics from the 4.4. I found it was just kind of better overall and more enjoyable to listen with than the W2-131. But, if you're one of those, especially if you're one of those measurement-obsessed people who, you want to have the lowest THD and all that kind of thing, well, the Luxury and Precision is going to win out of those two quite easily. So it was kind of, in the end, head, heart, if that makes any sense. So, but, as a device, the smoothness, smooth listening, relaxing listening, this did a really excellent job in that way. Again, it doesn't not going to blow my ears out with super loud volumes, but it gets loud enough. It's really nice with in-ear monitors. It's absolutely dead silent. None of kind of the popping weirdness of this. It was a smoother listen and a nicer listen than something like a BTR5, even with a BTR5 using USB from, say, the iPad Mini. That's where it did a really nice job. And of course, most importantly, it's better sounding than this. I mean, if you have a pair of in-ear monitors with multiple drivers like the FIO ones I've been reviewing recently, it's just the bass dynamics, the punch and all of that is going to be better from something like this or the RU6 than it is from the kind of dongle output that you get with Apple stuff, which is the main reason for getting something like that. So if you like a super smooth listen, you're that kind of thing, you like that smoothness, you don't like any harshness or aggressive sound, and you want something simple you can plug into a phone or just plug into a computer, something that will fit in your pocket or maybe magnetically clamp on the back of your phone or whatever, this did the job. And it's not as musical sounding as the RU6 for those people who care about that, but it's one of the most relaxing devices to listen to music with if you have a pair of decent in-ear monitors or headphones. So have you owned a W2 or a W2-131? If you have, do post your impressions below, because these videos are designed to help people decide whether to buy stuff or not buy it. And not just my impressions, but impressions of other owners do really help in that. Also, thank you to all my patrons for helping out make these videos. It is from their support primarily that I'm able to do these reviews. So do consider either, clicking on the thanks button or buying me a coffee or become a patron and join in our private chat, ask me questions, chat to me and that kind of thing. And I'll happily help you out with your audio journey and answer questions. And you can get advice free from all the noise and aggression that goes on in places online, especially places like Reddit. So as always, thanks again for watching and I'll see you online.